Hello, and thank you for attending our session for the presentation of our paper. We very much regret that we were unable to make it to Europe ourselves, and we envy you, all of you, the European summer. I hope my accent doesn't mystify you too much. As you might be able to tell, I originally am a New Zealander. I've lived in Australia for 30 years, as has Denise, and I think our accents are both stuck somewhere in the sort of mid-Tasman. Let's move on. Just by way of background, I was working at the University of Newcastle in Australia for a number of years, and in 2005 the Faculty of Business and Law there was caught up in a absolutely disastrous handling of allegations of plagiarism in a program that we ran in Malaysia. Now, very much to the University of Newcastle's credit, they made a good recovery from the scandal, and in particular they introduced a policy saying that all students had to have the opportunity to not only see their Turnitin originality reports, but also to resubmit, to correct poor attribution of their sources and resubmit up until the submission date. The findings of our research that we present below, we believe should be translatable to non-Turnitin institutions, but neither of us have worked in such an institution. Presently we are at the University of New South Wales in Canberra at the Australian Defence Force Academy. Here we have a heavy emphasis, especially within the School of Humanities, upon maintaining the secrecy of Turnitin reports and the non-allowance of formative use of Turnitin. Both Denise and I have a broad mandate to try to improve academic performance in relation to this, so we do a lot of advocacy for allowing for the formative use of Turnitin. Our interest, long term, and reflected in this paper, is on assessing academic and student views of Turnitin use. Now, when it comes to how plagiarism is perceived, one of the notable things, especially from the literature, is that plagiarism is very much a hot button issue, especially for academics. That is to say, academics tend to feel very strongly holding views in relation to plagiarism, whether, well, in particular if it's deliberate plagiarism, but even accidental instances tend to evoke very strong feelings from our fellow academics. With reference to the spectrum that we present below of plagiarist behaviour, our interest relates to the span of concerns on the right-hand side of that spectrum, from poor academic practice to serious plagiarism. And our experience is that this is where the majority of non-original student work occurs. We also raise the query, and we come back to this later, is that with reference to the work of Pierre Bourdieu, could it be that through the highly punitive approaches to even accidental instances of poor writing practice, academics are actually working to protect what we regard as their sacred space of academic life? Is perhaps our widespread insistence upon the originality of student work and student expression a method for academics to extract rent for their work? For those of you who don't recognise the work of Bourdieu, we apologise, but we feel it is a worthy inclusion in the paper. This is our spectrum of plagiarist behaviours. We don't claim that this is highly original. A lot of papers refer to, type 1 and type 2 instances, or even type 3 instances of plagiarism. What is notable here, and one of the couple of things that I draw your attention to, is on that right-hand column at the bottom, there are a number of writers raising the issue of patchwork writing, which is where students go to journals or online sources and assemble the argument by taking a little bit from here and a little bit from there, reflecting in many ways what a lot of organisational life is like, and that perhaps we should be a bit more accepting of this, and we come back to this later in the paper. The other part is in this sector here, the serious plagiarism part. The copying and pasting from an internet site, a journal or a book without attribution. You might think reflexively that that constitutes gross academic misconduct, but our experience is that many of that in particular, that instance in particular, can reflect just a temporary lapse in the judgment of individual academics and may not constitute a deep-seated behaviour by the students involved. When it comes to the institutional responses to plagiarism, we know that the compulsory sessions to teach academic integrity tend to have a minor impact. It tends to matter to students. These instructional approaches tend to matter to students at the very time that it is most pertinent to them. Just the same as the sessions teaching students how to use library resources don't make sense to them unless they're right close to submitting an academic assignment and they need to have specific questions answered. So the timing of these compulsory sessions to teach academic integrity are of great significance. Many writers also advocate the teaching of values, and we wouldn't disparage that, the teaching of academic values and academic integrity. However, we do believe that we need to take account that the things that students value may not be immediately the things that we value. And so that cohesion, for example, and the friendship between students that lead to them, for example, approaching the writing of an assignment in a group sense, they may be valuing those friendships ahead and the assistance to friends ahead of what we value in academic integrity. We have also formulated a typology of responses to non-original work by students. We characterise these as being investigative or punitive, deterrent and educative. In relation to investigation and punishment, these can only succeed in a very capable environment of policy and procedure, and with reference back to the University of Newcastle in Australia, this is something that they got very right. For this to succeed, though, we need middle managers in universities who can maintain attention to the whole issue. So it requires a lot of organisational effort and coordination and continuing over many years. Deterrence can arise from student knowledge of the consequences of plagiarism, and also can arise from the use of assignments or assessments requiring highly individualistic responses. The third approach, educative approach, can involve very specific instruction to students of how to write in an original way, and one innovative approach that we picked up from the literature is the use of IMAPs, illustrating how well the students mentally process their assignment task. An example of IMAP as used in a business course that I teach is given below. For those of you who are not familiar with these, there are many writers who talk about and instruct on the use of mind maps in particular, and this is what the IMAP in fact represents. And it does require from students quite an original response in relation to specific assessments. So characterising those approaches relative to ways that we might address non-original work by students, we offer to you there a chart that might give you some sort of indication in relation to what is appropriate, for example, in particular circumstances. Here's an example of an IMAP. At the core of it is this question: what does organisational strategy look like? And the obvious person that they should refer to is Porter's strategy types, but they also should be referring to these factors around here. And overall, a student submitting this is illustrating to me that they've thought through, they've shown me the progression of their thoughts, of their reading, and of their integration of ideas into their final works. Now, with reference to the paper that you hopefully have been able to read, we adopted a qualitative approach. We wanted to achieve a deeper understanding of student and academic experience of the use of Turnitin. We have also tested the utility of IMAPs within one very large undergraduate course, very large at our institutions, probably not large in other institutions. We used this over a couple of sessions with about 130 students. We've also sent questionnaires to students and fellow academics, and we've aligned this with examination of the very ample literature relating to student plagiarism. The analysis of all that data as it's textual has been undertaken with reliance upon in vivo software. Our particular interest then is upon the formative use of Turnitin, that is to say where students can see both the originality reports and have the opportunity to resubmit assignments with the chance to correct any errors in their attribution of sources. By way of limitations, we acknowledge that our research approach takes very little account of the impact of international differences in relation to intellectual property, and the student base that we assess here is overwhelmingly from European backgrounds, and to some extent our fellow academics also, although it is a bit more varied. By way of results, the responses in relation to the use of Turnitin from academics, 28 so far. The flavour of these responses have been very mixed, and they are the major part of what we present below, but we are quite content that we've reached saturation in relation to those themes. For IMAP use, again, we're pretty satisfied that we've reached saturation. About 92 undergraduate students to date have responded about the usefulness of these. In relation to student views of Turnitin use, to date we've only had 23 responses, but they've been very detailed. Common issues here include the inconsistencies and complaints of the inconsistency of academics allowing even views of the Turnitin reports, let alone the opportunity for formative approaches. By way of analysis, the original title of this conference paper was Denialists, Gotchas, Skill Builders and Legalists, Student and Academic Attitudes to Turnitin Use. That former title really conveys a snapshot of what we've found in our research. In relation to IMAPs, we're satisfied students do see these as useful in organising their thoughts, and also it does convey or ensure a certain amount of evidence that students have cognitively engaged with the writing of their assignments. It is difficult for us to succinctly summarise the emergent themes and student responses to our survey in relation to Turnitin use. And this is the one area where we know we need to do more surveying work. The academic views are stark, and they're the substance of what we report below. First, we have what we call the gotchas. These are the people who enjoy the chase, catching errant students. Second, the denialists, and we spell those out in detail below. Third would be the skill builders, and finally the legalists, and each of these are explained below. Before we do so, I should state that our own view probably started on the skill building side, and in the long term we've probably shifted much more towards the legalist approach, and hopefully I can spell out for you below the reason for that shift over time. The denialists, and I know this is laden language, I mean denialism in Australia context is often about denying the Holocaust, and so I talk about plagiarism being a hot button issue. Well, perhaps using the term denialist is equally hot button, and I can acknowledge that. These academics either keep their Turnitin reports secret from their students, or they choose not to use Turnitin at all, and they believe either that the students are so highly moral that they wouldn't resort to plagiarism, it's quite common, or that the assignments they set are so unique that no student could resort to plagiarism, or more rarely that the incidence of plagiarism is so minor that it isn't worth addressing. And the last one, I guess, is very denialist. And below we say, look, for each one of those we believe that they are not sufficient to explain what happens, certainly in relation to our student base. The gotchas, the academics in this camp are quite likely to not allow the formative use of Turnitin, or if they do, they use it in pursuit of errant students. So their mindset is towards very much towards punishment. In the literature, you see terms such as theft and cheat and stolen, and this is used very much by the gotchas. And so you look at the papers and the extent of the moral outrage that is expressed by authors there. A couple of papers by US ethicists in particular, surprising, are very, very strong on this front. And by way of confession, I guess, in pre-Turnitin days, I was one of those academics who would look at a student writing and think, this is wrong, and go onto the web and discover where they lifted their ideas and their language from. And then, you know, we do have a natural urge to detect and punish cheats, and there's a certain satisfaction in detecting and punishing cheats, but it's a pretty rough road to ride. Bourdieusian analysis can be of great help here. Could it be that our insistence on students correctly citing their sources is a means for us to extract the rent from the ideas, for the use of their ideas of ourselves or our colleagues? The massification of higher education also inevitably carries some costs in the quality of what we see from our students. In Australia, the long-term target is that 40% of our population have a degree. If we do this, we keep pursuing this, inevitably we certainly are going to see a dilution in the standard of the students that we deal with. And in our experience, it's the gotchas who in particular resent the massification of higher education. The skill builders, these and the legalists, are the most likely academics to rely upon formative use of Turnitin, and the skill builders are the most likely to formally teach students how to undertake proper referencing of their sources. This can become problematic in big programs such as, you know, the Masters of Arts or the Masters of Business, because the problem is that so many academics try to teach this stuff, and the students get to a point where they go, oh no, not this again. So these people, though, are rightly and are probably rightly motivated to try to get their students onto the right track, and they tend to be very endorsing of the university-wide systems. We have one here for our undergraduates in particular that is directed at teaching them good academic practice and academic integrity. Finally, we have the legalists. This is the group of academics that is very likely to allow the formative use of Turnitin, and for these academics the emphasis is upon a fair process. And somewhat like the skill builders, these academics spell out the standard of what constitutes originality in academic writing and then reward good practice. And as I said, over time I think both Denise and I have moved from a fairly skill builder approach towards the legalist approach. By way of discussion, we know we have developed a good understanding of academic views of Turnitin use. We do see that there is a lot of scope for us to develop a deeper understanding of student views of Turnitin use, and in our case in particular undergraduate views of it. The premise that we operate on continually is that through invoking the use of IMAPs coupled with that formative use of Turnitin, and it's a really quite simple approach, what we have seen is that we quickly move undergraduate students to a level of performance that is comparable to that of master's students. And it's not that complicated, but getting that invoked across a whole campus, let alone a whole university, is quite hard going. In relation to international students, especially those from Confucian backgrounds, Southeast Asia, China, to quite some extent India and the Middle East, maybe we as academics need to make a mental shift in relation to what we expect them to, how we expect them to perform, especially when we bring them to Australia and they've got all of that adjustment to Australian life. Finally, we need to diffuse the emotionally laden debate around student plagiarism, giving up on language such as cheat, deceit and theft. That's it. I think I'm almost hitting the 20-minute mark. I do hope you've had no problems following my weird accent, and we would very much welcome any correspondence with you in relation to our paper and to your own experiences. Thank you very much.